Oh, I'm sorry. You didn't get that? Well, that is an oral approach that is used for deaf education. So hello, my name is Elizabeth Andrews, and I'm here to talk with you about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, deaf education. Being an interpreter in the educational setting, while also having a deaf husband who was raised in the public school system, this is a very important subject that I can easily identify with. Deaf education is important to know about because it essentially is forming future members of our society, and it's important to know if they're being formed at a level that they'll be contributors to society. Forming the intelligence level of that person. These three approaches are the oral approach, the total communication approach, and the bicultural bilingual approach, also known as the bi-bi approach. The oldest and most widely used method for deaf education is the oral approach. You received a sample of that in the beginning of my speech. This method consists of using hearing aids along with extensive speech therapy and lip reading training. This is a very hard and exhausting way to communicate, and there is much communication loss. As for how successful it has been, positive results have only been shown when subjects were chosen from a few model oral programs in the United States. The second approach is coined the total communication approach. This approach uses some sign and finger spelling along with oral communication, sometimes with the aid of hearing aids. Basically, whatever is necessary to educate that deaf child is what is used. Unfortunately, though, many times this approach is taught inaccurately and inconsistently. As stated in the book, Language, Learning, and Deafness by Michael Strong, 90% of deaf children have hearing parents, most of whom are not fluent in any sign language. So these children arrive to a school with minimal language at best. The problem for the teachers is not how to incorporate their native language into their formal education, but instead figuring out what kind of language to teach them and what's the best way. Many times the total communication method is used as a way to incorporate some sign, but if they have none and it's not taught appropriately, it can be unsuccessful. Because only 10% of deaf children are lucky enough to be born to deaf parents, and I say lucky because the hearing status of a parent has been well established as a predictor of future linguistic and academic success. So many times a residential school is necessary for the other 90%. Residential schools are schools that deaf children live at during the week and most times go home on the weekend. These schools recognize ASL as a language and treat English as a second language and deafness as a culture, hence the third method called the bilingual bicultural approach, or the bi-bi approach. Teachers within these schools are almost always deaf, which provides the student with a proper language model, and since children most commonly identify and mimic with the language of their peers, being immersed in a population that is completely deaf helps them to excel. The bi-bi approach helps teach the students ASL, which then gives them a better understanding of English. Negatives to this approach is that parents must send their children to live at these schools, but until public schools recognize this approach and learn how to incorporate it into the public school setting, then this is still necessary. Once again, there are three main approaches used for teaching deaf children: oral, total communication, and the bi-bi. While trying to decide which approach is best, Brazel and Quigley attempted to address this issue by assessing the effects of 4 different home language environments on academic performance through a comparison of scores on the Stanford Achievement Test and the Test of Synthetic Abilities. The 4 groups consisted of children ages 10 to 19 who had received oral English with intensive training, oral English with no special training, manual English or the total communication, and the ASL or bi-bi approach. In the end, the total communication group scored highest in all measures of achievement, reading, and grammatical ability. The oral group with no special training scored the lowest on everything, while the ASL group scored higher than the intensive oral group, concluding that manual communication or total communication has advantage over oral communication, and that it is also preferable to ASL. The cold hard truth is that children are in school give or take for about 180 days a year. During those 180 days, kids are in school for about 7 hours, usually exposed to some type of language. But once they go home, unless they have deaf parents or active parents within the deaf community, almost all of the 90% born to hearing parents spend the rest of their days in silence, along with the other half of the year not spent in school. Until parents take an active role in their deaf child's life, all of these approaches toward their education will have limited success. Thanks for listening.